Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice podcast. My name is El. I come to you again today to read some quotes from the Law of One, the raw material. And today we're going to be going over session 46.9 and 46.10. This is going to be on the topics of service to others and service to self. Mostly just to share my perspectives from my limited perspectives from what I know about the service to self path versus the service to others path, but also how it applies more specifically to your life. And assuming if you're listening to this, you are of the service to others orientation, which would mean that you're not seeking on the negative path, but you're seeking on the positive path, and therefore this advice is more catered to you. However, there's some things I know about the service to self path which may be helpful in understanding so that you can, just know what to look out for and maybe even avoid in yourself in your own seeking, because the service to self path is sometimes, well, not the path itself, but the way to act in that manner is sometimes tempting. Let's go into it. So, the quote, this is from 46.10, and then I'll go back to 46.9. The reason why is because this material isn't always in a linear fashion. It's a question-or-answer form, so sometimes the questioner asks something that comes a little after, and then you have to go back and put it together, which is why also rereading this material over is very good. You'll pick up something that you didn't notice on the first read because it came later, and then you can all put it together again and make more sense of it the second, third, fourth, fifth time around you read it. All right, so the quote begins first with Ra stating, quote, "The first acceptance or control, depending on polarity, is of the self. Anger is one of the many things to be accepted and loved as a part of the self or controlled as a part of the self if the entity is to do work." And then in a different part of the quote, "The entity polarizing positively perceives the anger. This entity, if using this catalyst mentally, blesses and loves this anger in itself. It then intensifies this anger consciously in mind alone until the folly of this red ray energy is perceived not as folly in itself, but as energy subject to spiritual entropy due to the randomness of energy being used. Positive orientation then provides the will and the faith to continue this mentally intensive experience of letting the anger be understood, accepted, and integrated with the mind-body-spirit complex. The other self, which is the object of anger, is thus transformed into an object of acceptance, understanding, and accommodation, all being reintegrated using the great energy which anger began. The negatively oriented mind-body-spirit complex will use this anger in a similarly conscious fashion, refusing to accept the undirected or random energy of anger, and instead, through will and faith, funneling this energy into a practical means of venting the negative aspect of this emotion so as to obtain control over the other self or otherwise control the situation causing anger. Control is the key to negatively polarized use of catalyst. Acceptance is the key to positively polarized use of catalyst. Between these polarities lies the potential for this random and undirected energy creating a bodily complex analog of what you would call the cancerous growth of tissue." End of quote. Ra, the Law of One. Okay, so sorry to throw cancer in there. It was more just wanting to speak about service to others and service to self. But they are speaking in this one about the nature of catalyst. And so when catalyst comes our way, it's another way you could think of catalyst is when experience comes our way, depending on our orientation, whether we're of the service to others orientation or of the service to self orientation, we will then decide whether we are going to want to accept or control that catalyst. And depending on our orientation, if we're of the service to others orientation, which like I said, I assume you are, then you will likely want to accept your catalyst instead of controlling it. Acceptance is the key to service to others. Control is the key to service to self. And these are the types of things that I would like to go into. But in my brain, I like to use pictures and images. So I like to first just give you what I view it as. So, I would think of service to self entity as a sort of black hole, right? If their thing is about control, service to self, then that means that any catalyst that comes within their domain, like any planet, any energy that comes near the black hole, that black hole brings it into itself and controls it, makes it a part of itself to control the self for the benefit of the self. Whereas the service to others entity I would see more as a sun, a radiant sun that is unconditionally loving and giving light and love to everything in creation, 360 degrees of love, unconditional, right? It's radiant out to everyone, everything. It doesn't, what do you call it? Doesn't necessarily discriminate against, right? Self and other self. It's just giving to all at all times. So there is a way just to sort of view it in your head. And then also, I would like to go into sort of the perspectives of what maybe a service to self person might feel versus a service to other person might feel. Which is difficult because I don't believe myself to be service to self. However, I'm human, and I definitely battle with duality to a certain degree in my human aspect, which likes to sort of default to the service to self mode sometimes. All right, so what do I think of it as? So if I was a service to self entity, anything that came towards me, I would want to manipulate. So and control for the benefit of myself exclusively. So service to self, in my opinion, is like it's to serve the self for the benefit of the self, whereas service to others, it includes both of these things. It's not necessarily one is either or. Service to self is the path that is not, because it denies the oneness and unconditional love of creation. Whereas the service to others path respects both the paths. It sort of resolves the paradox in that it respects the service to self entity's path, but at the same time realizes that there is the service to others path. So it's more about accepting these two things instead of I don't know. I guess in my head, sometimes you think of things, oh, I'm acting selfish if I'm serving myself. But the difference is if you're acting to serve yourself, that's not necessarily mean that you're a service to self entity. How you treat yourself radiates out to others more than what you kind of try to do for them. So how you treat yourself very much is an example of how you think others should be treated. Meaning to serve the self, as long as it's not at the manipulation and expense of other people, is actually what you should be doing. At the same time, how are you going to serve others if you haven't served yourself? How are you going to go feed others if you yourself have a hungry stomach? Right? You don't want to be a martyr. You don't want to go out trying to serve each other at the expense of yourself. So you need to be wise. You need to take care of yourself. And in that, you are able to take care of others. And in that, the perspective of unity doesn't see a difference between self and other self. To help the self is to help other self, and to help the other self is to help the self. Now, if you were a service to self entity, I'm not for sure on this because I don't do a ton of research on it, but I believe that the way they see it is more, they see themselves as on the service to self path, and they think that is the righteous path, that is the correct path. They believe the green ray chakra of unconditional love to be folly, as in I don't know, they just don't believe in it, basically. Maybe I'll tell you what they think of and how their chakra thing works. So they seek, instead of activating all their chakras, they neglect the heart chakra. So they maximize the use of the bottom three chakras in order to skip the heart of unconditional love and understanding of other selves, and they go to the throat chakra and to the indigo chakra to manifest things of infinity for themselves, for the benefit of themselves. So in their path, they really do feel that to serve other selves is silly. And in that, how they would see things is that, say you are entered the service to self path, you would probably get some type of master that would control you, because that's what their thing is control and manipulation. And they would control and manipulate you to the point that you were enslaved. And if funny enough, because they're always tricksters, these people, if you allow them to enslave you, then that's what they're there to do. But the thing is in their head, they're thinking, this person's stupid. I'm teaching them a lesson by enslaving them. Like, only through me enslaving them will they rise up and realize they need to also enslave others. And so this is the negative aspect of the service to self path. They talk about entropy all the time. It's because the service to self path doesn't respect other selves. It's just a constant battle of service to self versus service to self. There's a pyramid, and every person in the pyramid of power is always fighting. Versus if you had a service to others type pyramid, people could take their spots in the pyramid with honor, and there would just be an acceptance of it. They could work in harmony together, and if you kind of see the difference of what I'm saying. Okay, so now let's talk about how this works when you're dealing with other people. So we're going to go back to the service to others perspective, just, for the way I see it here. So if other people, other things, catalysts, emotions come my way, I have the choice, do you hear me? The choice, this is important, to control or accept. If I control things and I'm on the service to others path, that's not what I want to do. I want to be accepting them. So instead of me telling others what's best, because I very well may know what's best, maybe I do, maybe I don't, right? But if I do know what's best for someone, I still am not going to go out and make them and manipulate them into acting favorably for themselves. Better, what I'm going to do is try to accept who they are, which means that I'm more so just going to accept the free will aspects of who they are. If that other self wants to seek to better themselves or seeks the type of information that I might have, I'm free to offer it to them. I'm also free to use my free will to offer my viewpoint of them too, and then they can use their free will to accept or reject, my perspective of that. But in that, the biggest part is that I need to accept their free will of other people to make their own choices at their own pace. And I think that's actually, if you're on the service to others path, you might think that's easy sometimes. It's actually very, very difficult. You see people destroying themselves and just acting in very negative ways, and you try your best, you try to tell them honestly, you try it the easy way with love, you try it the harder way. Like I was just thinking, like with my roommate, I tried to years of trying to get him to clean up after himself and not live in filth and things like this, and I think that my love is going to transform him. But, eventually I had to come to accept that he's not going to ever change with his free will, at least in the time that is somewhat of an acceptable thing where it's not going to affect me mentally negatively. So I then had to accept his free will to live as he will, and, unfortunately had to kick that roommate out. So you can see how I very well may want to manipulate him into learning to clean after himself, which would be best for him and for me and everyone, but it's just manipulation. So what's better is that I just be honest and offer advice, but then at the same time am willing to accept when people reject that advice or want to seek at their own pace and their own information and path. Okay, so that's talking about other selves, but now you can also speak about this same thing in regards to yourself. You yourself have thoughts and desires and of that nature which aren't always controllable, right? So you would think, if you're trying to discipline your personality, you would think, hey, I got to control all the bad things that I do and all my desires so that I am just a purely positive being. Well, what I would warn you about is that is a control that you're trying to do. So, and this is very subtle, so you have to pay attention here between what I'm saying. So there's a difference between control and discipline. I would state that discipline, you would think discipline and control are the same thing, but I'll think that they're completely different. So control means to, like the service to self, it's a short-term solution. You are able to control the situation, make it remedy itself, but it's only going to be a short-term remedy because you controlled the situation into manipulating it into what you wanted, versus if you were to instead accept yourself, and it takes a little longer in the discipline aspect of it, but you accept yourself, inspect the things that you're accepting about yourself, integrate those things into your being. It's a longer lasting change and transformation in which you don't need to then go out into the world and control your emotions, right? Because you've taken the long route of slowly disciplining them, bringing them into being, into a balance, where then all of a sudden your spontaneous reactions to things are just naturally of a service to others orientation, instead of you having to control your personality into submission, into being a loving entity of unity. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you're looking to be on the service to others to path and better yourself, you don't always want to control everything to a certain degree. You have desires. Those desires need to be sought after and integrated into your being and balanced, and figure out where they sit within you. And you do that through the long path of slowly accepting, integrating, and learning about yourself, and doing that slow route of transformation. I don't know if you've ever seen certain like spiritual type people online. They seem so perfect and like non-human. Like, I don't know, I hope you get some humanness from me and the perspectives I share, but I've seen these people and they're so ungrounded and flighty because they're basically just controlling themselves into looking like a spiritual person, when in essence it's another mask that they're choosing to wear. They've chosen, instead of going the spiritual route, they've taken the spiritual mask, the spiritual ego route, which is a tricky thing. Yeah, and you know what this just brings up, because I'm going to be talking, since I'm talking about other selves for a moment, how do you determine, maybe out in the world, is somebody a service to others or a service to self in their seeking? Well, I mean, first of all, it's not necessarily your concern. Your concern is with accepting them and loving them. But it's interesting to point out that a lot of service to self entities may promote themselves as service to others type people. So, like if you have certain people have very good looks and they're very concerned about always looking great, that this is sort of a way to control things, right? It's a way to control others and the appearance that you're giving. Whereas maybe if you wanted to look good for yourself because it helps you feel good and you're able to radiate who you feel you are better, then, there's sort of a difference between the two things. Like, it's not like you can go out and you see somebody who's like good looking and you think, oh, they must be a manipulative person. It's not always that way. You have to get down to someone's intentions, in which case I would state that although you are one with everything, you do not know anyone's intentions, really. You can perceive them the best that you think you can and act accordingly with your free will, how you think you should act. But you never know the intentions of another, so it's good to back off about what you think their intention is and where they're coming from, and better just to accept their personality and who they are. And like I say, if you see an opportunity to give advice and you feel it's appropriate, then go for it. But otherwise, you generally want to respect the free will of other people to come to you. And then I think a lot of people have trouble with that aspect, even because they think that you have to go out and be giving information all the time. But I'll tell you how I found spiritual information in the Law of One. When I look back in hindsight, what I did was, it was focus. It was, I wanted to know the answers. Somebody asked me what I thought about God and afterlife and all that, and that kickstarted a thought within me which didn't leave me. It was a focus that stayed with me for first weeks and then months and then years, to the point where my focus and will was so trained upon knowing the truth that eventually different sorts of truths found me. And then eventually I found the Law of One information, which I feel was like very top-notch, sort of what I was looking for. So with that, though, it was through my free will effort. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that it works the same with others. If they're not finding the truth per se, or they're running astray with the chicken with their head cut off, it may be that they don't want to know the truth. They do not seek to know anything that you know. But if you're patient, you drop a seed here and there, you'll find that others will randomly come to you and ask you things of a certain nature. And you feel free to share all you can with them and do the best of your ability, do your best to serve them. Okay, so I don't want to go on too long. I believe I have gone on a little far already. And I hope that these ramblings helped you. And if they did, well, you can always access this information at theoneinfinitecreator.com. And I would just hope that you would consider in your life and just basically keep in your head the difference between control and acceptance when it comes to loving other people, and when it comes to yourself, the difference between control and discipline. I find that one comes up a lot. If you really should ponder the difference between the slow route of discipline and transformation versus the short-term route of control and not very long-lasting effects. Okay, so with that, I will leave you guys. I will be back Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so I'll see you guys on Wednesday for another one of these. I love you all. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.